Jane Doe Advocacy Center, next on City Corner. Hi, I'm Sarah Thompson and welcome to City Corner. For this episode of City Corner, we're going to learn more about Jane Doe Advocacy Center. What's really special about this is a center that focuses on legal services for victims of sexual violence. I'm joined by Rachna Goel. She is the founder and executive director of Jane Doe. Do you go by Jane Doe?
Yep,
just go by Jane Doe.
Yeah.
So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So this is something unique because there are other sort of nonprofits in the area that work focus on legal services, pro bono or on a sliding scale. And then there are other agencies that focus on victims of domestic violence, maybe sexual violence, but not necessarily bringing the two together. So tell us about how you put this all together and founded the center.
Sure. So kind of where it came from, you're right, Sarah. There's a lot of organizations out there that really focus on domestic violence or sexual assault in different ways. Some provide social services, some provide legal services. But what I really noticed was that there was a gap in just bringing it all together and making services really affordable and really accessible to as many people as possible. So what we did was we took the sliding fee scale that a lot of low-income organizations have. We took the sexual violence focus that we didn't notice quite so much in as many organizations, and we paired it with legal services to provide really specialized professional services to survivors regardless of any of those factors. So by bringing all that together, we created something really unique to serve a need that we really saw in the community.
So let's talk about it. I mean, when we have this term sexual violence or sexual assault, it covers a wide array. I mean, it really does, legally speaking.
Right.
Talk about sort of who your, not specifically, but your clients are, what categories they cover, who can contact you, what those situations might be.
Sure. So what we do is we work with people who've experienced sexual abuse, and that covers a very wide spectrum. So, we get everything from what people consider to be minor cases of sexual harassment and sexual abuse within relationships up to what might be considered the really drastic cases of the rapes and the assaults, that things that you might see on TV and comparable types of cases. And then there's everything in the middle. So, the types of clients that we see really range in terms of age, in terms of what they've experienced, but the one thing that links them all together is they've all experienced some kind of sexual abuse.
And you fill that gap because when that does happen, I think a lot of people don't necessarily know where to turn. I mean, on one end, you can, I guess, directly call the police after an incident happens, but then from where you go legally, people don't know, what type of lawyer do I contact? And this sort of fills that gap. Exactly.
It fills that gap between, we have a lot of really great lawyers out there who work in different areas of law. And then we have a lot of great victim advocates who work with people who survived a certain type of crime. But those two didn't always mesh together, where we had lawyers who knew the system, who could give legal advice, who also knew a lot about a certain social issue. And so this really meshes those two things together.
Okay, I want to start with, you've got some statistics that you guys sort of put out there, and we have some of those as well that we're going to share. And just thought we could kind of go through these topics and sort of you can help explain some of it, and as well as with some of the clients that you deal with, how they fall into this category. The first slide that we have is from the U.S. Department of Justice, and it's every 2 minutes someone in the U.S. is sexually assaulted. And I think what's so scary about this is with sexual violence, it's actually one area that's pretty unreported. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. So the one thing you're going to see is that no matter where you do research, the different statistics are going to be, they're going to be a little different from each other. And the reason for that is because it is such an underreported crime. It's something that happens, and sometimes it gets reported to law enforcement, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it gets reported through advocacy organizations. So somebody might call a social service agency, or they might call to get counseling or join a support group, but they don't necessarily call law enforcement. So we have some really muddy statistics out there. But that one that we found from the U.S. Department of Justice is one that seems to be pretty consistent, which is that, in the United States, every 2 minutes we have a new case of sexual abuse coming up.
Do you find that a lot of people contacting you, are the majority of the cases, have they already gone through, have they contacted the police, or are they just, this is something fresh, you're that first point where they might say, this happened to me, what do I do? And they haven't actually reported it.
It's more the latter.
Okay.
We do have some cases where they've contacted the police and there's investigations pending. But in most cases, people haven't contacted the police, mainly because they never knew how or they didn't know when they should. The question we get the most often is, well, I could call the police, but what am I supposed to tell them? Or I don't have any proof, so what am I supposed to say? So a lot of it comes before that reporting step even happens, to learn, well, should I report? And if I do, what exactly does that mean, and what would happen if I did?
And your response when you get those questions is what? Is it, well, let's take this on as a case, or is it, no, you should contact the authorities to report something, or does it just vary case by case?
It really varies case by case, and it depends on what it is they're trying to accomplish. The cases we get the most often happen in domestic situations. So when they call after an incident of sexual abuse, they're looking for more than just criminal justice. They have issues of, well, we're married, or we share children, or we share property, and all of those issues come together when an instance of violence happens. So really, it's a team effort. It's, whether or not they decide they want to press charges is totally up to them. So we work with them and we coach them through just learning what the process is and what will happen if they decide to take that step, and then deciding if those results are something they actually want.
Okay, all right.
To begin with.
Thank you for clarifying that. Let's go on to the next slide, which is, again, these are to national statistics. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men will experience some type of sexual abuse over the course of their lives. And then the other one is nearly 60% of these women, 1 in 5 will be raped. I feel like in the media, we generally hear about rape. I think right now you hear it, college campuses become a big one. But I mean, this happens, and to your point, happens within marriages. It happens in all sorts of scenarios. What would you say is something that most people don't assume about rape, just what they don't assume about it? We all think about, when you go to college, people tell their daughters, be careful. There's the alarm, stations placed around campus. But this is happening all the time in all different situations.
Right. And I think the one thing that people really need to know is that in more cases than not, a perpetrator and a survivor know each other. And a lot of times they know each other well. So that means they are friends, they are classmates if we're talking about a college campus situation. If we're going off campus, they might be related to each other. They might be coworkers, they might be married. Is that this happens most frequently in situations where people know each other than it does by strangers. And that gets thrown off a lot, especially on SVU. We all love watching TV shows.
Yeah.
We see a lot of really dramatic cases where a lot of times the perpetrator and the victim don't know each other. And the big difference between that and between reality is that almost every client I've ever dealt with has known their perpetrator. And that's where the problem starts.
Do you find, because there's so much trauma with a sexual assault or violence, that how does that affect the ability and the way that you deal with your clients, considering that they're going through so much and they may not or may be getting counseling to help deal with the effects of what they've experienced?
That's a really great question. And with every client, again, it's different. With some clients, you find that they don't need any counseling. They're either not at the point yet, or they're never going to get there, where mental health treatment is not what they need. What they need is to have solutions to their problems.
Okay.
But that's not in the majority of cases. Most of the clients that I've had, what they need is, they need to process through it, and they need to work with a counselor or with a support group or something to have that part of them heard. So when that comes up, we love collaborating with other professionals and organizations in the community, whether it's that we need to find free counseling services through another nonprofit, or whether we refer them out to private counselors and therapists in the area. It becomes very much of a team effort. And then as their case proceeds in court, I can work collaboratively with whatever mental health professional they're working with to make sure that we're serving their best interest every step of the way.
Speaking of when you brought up with popular culture, I mean, obviously you can't open a newspaper or turn on the TV without hearing about Bill Cosby, the Bill Cosby situation. Mm-hmm. And I think what's so interesting about that is beyond the fact that, people sort of doubted these women for a long time because it happened so long ago, it's how people place the burden of proof really on a woman, the victim in that case. And again, I mean, that's got to make it so difficult from a legal perspective as well as for your clients, again, to deal with emotionally. I mean, talk about some of that too, where there isn't anything you have physically that can prove beyond if they haven't had a rape kit done. How does that kind of come into play when someone walks into your office and says, I've been raped, it's by someone who might be in a position of power, I have no proof, but this really did happen. I need your help.
That is one of the hardest things to work through with a client. And really for a survivor, it's one of the hardest things for them to process as well, because there's really two disconnects that happen when we're talking about evidence. One is, like you said, there might just not be any. It's if a rape kit wasn't done, if someone didn't witness it, if there's no video footage of any sort, then it's really hard to prove that something happened. And it really becomes, for lack of better terms, it becomes a he said, she said in terms of, well, who's going to say what and who are we going to believe? The other area of frustration that comes in a lot is when there is evidence, but it's not legally admissible evidence. It's, so many times I've had people come in or people call me and say, well, I have letters from somebody, or I have people willing to testify about some collateral issue, and then it's a matter of explaining the difference between, there's certain types of evidence that may prove to you as a person that yes, something happened, but you can't always take that into the court of law, and you can't always use that to prove something to a judge or to a jury. So it becomes a very frustrating disconnect.
So when something does happen, in the case like with these women who are raped, what is it that you sort of need to work not in your favor, but to support your story when you have so much, it seems, going against the victim to prove?
Well, the thing that I tell clients the most is that they need to do what's right for them, and that working on preserving evidence probably shouldn't be the first thing that they think about, because a lot of times people, they won't call the police, or they won't go and seek any kind of counseling or therapy because they're afraid that's going to create a negative trail of evidence. And in the process, what happens is, well, not only is evidence that could be used actually lost, but their needs aren't being served, and it's just taking them further down into that spiral. So what I tell people is always to look at the options and do what feels right for them in a given circumstance, and then we'll deal with what we need to take into court later on, because there's really no perfect recipe for what to do.
Right, and you can never really prepare for these things and have it, as you pointed out.
Exactly.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we're going to speak more with Rachna about what Jane Doe Advocacy Center does, but we've got the information for you on the screen. If anything that we've talked about so far, you want to learn more information, it's janedoeadvocacy.org. And again, we've got the information there, as well as the address and phone number and an email if you'd like to reach out. But we're going to take a quick break and we'll return right after this. Please stay with us.
When you throw away money on wasted electricity, you're throwing away everything you could have bought with it. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at energysavers.gov.
G-Morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me. Are your parents home later? We can hang. LUV, love you. JK. Holla back, holla back, holla back. Are you with your friends? That's lame. We're in a huge fight right now. XO. What'd you dream about? Something I did. Are you on your way to the mall? I'm lonely. Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.
I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome back to City Corner. We're talking today with Rachna Goel. She is the founder and executive director of Jane Doe Advocacy Center. That's a nonprofit legal services center that helps survivors of sexual violence, and they become your clients, and you take on their cases, a variety of cases. In the first half, we covered some statistics, some national statistics, and I want to kind of continue on that to continue our discussion. The next one that we have really focuses on specifically something here in Missouri, and it's 54% of women who experience rape or attempted rape in Missouri are under the age of 18. So we've got that one, and there's another one too, that in the United States, 28% of all youth ages 14 to 17, I can't believe this, have been sexually victimized over the course of their lifetime. And this breaks down to 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys who become a victim of child sexual abuse. I mean, this is every parent's worst nightmare. And I think you always ask yourself, is there any way, how do I protect my child? From the cases that you've gotten, what do you say to that when a parent says, how did this happen? How can I protect my child? How can I make this not happen?
And you're right, that's a question that comes up all the time. Probably on a daily basis, I get that question in some way, shape, or form. And the answer that I always give is that the best way you can really protect your children is to have open communication with them about it. Talk to your kids about sex, talk to them about relationships, talk with them about strangers. Open those lines of communication so that kids know when something is right and when something is wrong. Because especially with child sexual abuse, the time it happens the most frequently is when kids just don't know that something wrong is happening.
Right.
And kids are very intuitive. So they get a feeling, they get a suspicion, they get the bad feelings that come along with something wrong that's happening, but they don't necessarily know when to pull the trigger and when to actually stop something. So just talk with younger kids, talking about the good touch, bad touch concept and making sure they know what to expect and what to do if they're ever in a touchy situation.
Let's explore this a little bit further, because I think what's so difficult with kids, as you pointed out, is, they might not report something as, a 25-year-old would, to say this was clearly wrong and what you did was a violation. It's that really thin line where, as you pointed out, their intuition says, hey, this is kind of weird or something happened, but they might not immediately go tell their parents. And then beyond that, what happens from there is how much of it's contained within a family, or let's say contained within a school or within a church or any situation. And, to bring up a case that's again in the media right now with the Doe family, where here was a young man who was molesting his sisters, essentially. They kept it within their family, didn't report it, and then here you're dealing with, the fallout, many years later. What is the responsibility of an adult when they think a child has been the victim of some sort of sexual violence or assault, or just that area of sexual abuse, that wide area of sexual abuse?
So what's really interesting about that is that mandated reporting laws have been changing in Missouri over the course of the last few years. The way the laws used to be, and the way that most people are still used to it being right now, is that anybody who is responsible for the care of a child in a professional context is what's called a mandated reporter. Okay. And that means that if they come to know, or if they come to suspect any case of child abuse in any form, they need to call the Missouri Child Support Hotline and file a report. Recent changes to the law actually widened that and made the mandated reporting requirements more broad. So now anybody who comes to know that a child is being abused is technically required to call that child abuse hotline and file a report. So it's a very interesting dichotomy, because when something happens, especially when it's within a family, the first instinct of most parents especially is to keep it a secret. To say, this is a family matter, this is something shameful, this is something we're going to keep within the family. But really what that does is that perpetuates the problem. Absolutely. Because then that sends the message to children that this is something shameful, this is something that's not meant to be talked about. And that's the reason why we have to be out here talking about sexual abuse and really trying to, sometimes it feels like pulling teeth to get people to come out and talk about it when it does happen.
Do you feel that, in your years of working in this area, that you've seen a change of more people reporting, or is it still something that goes relatively unreported because it is people don't want to step into that legal arena when it happens to their child?
I think it's a combination of both. I think we're moving in the right direction, for sure. I think that especially since a majority of survivors are women, that as women's empowerment gets greater, as we progress in the workplace, as we progress politically, that women are coming out and talking about it more, and they're beginning to demand justice more and what they're entitled to. Still, especially with a lot of people who are raised in more old-fashioned homes or who have more traditional values, it is still something that becomes very taboo to talk about. So, you look at the social considerations, then you top it off with the fact it's just a hard thing to talk about. That a lot of people who are survivors of sexual abuse, they don't want to talk about it because it brings up a lot of bad memories. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but there's still definitely a long way to go.
And legally, do you think that people are afraid when they get again into this legal arena that they have to retell publicly their story over and over and over again? I mean, is that sort of, not criteria, but is that pretty much what happens when you take on that legal course? Is that correct?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I've seen that be the primary reason why people don't want to open up and talk about it. Because, I mean, even just looking at like a family court case that I would do routinely with my clients, they have to talk about it a lot. Because let's say we're talking about an adult woman and there is either a marriage involved or children involved. Well, they have to open up and talk to me first because I'm their lawyer. And at some point, they probably have to open up and talk to a guardian ad litem who's representing their child. So there's that barrier to cross. They may have to talk to another investigator. They may have to give a deposition at some point. And then finally, one day, they may have to sit on the stand and testify. So there are a lot of instances where they have to tell that story. And then if you put them into any sort of counseling, any sort of support group, anything else to meet their own needs, they have to be telling that story again. So it's something that, their instinct wants to bury it and never wants to talk about it, but then the legal system says, oh no, we have to pull it out, we have to talk about it, and we have to do it all right now.
Is the system set up to help victims, or do you think there's areas that it could be improved where it's kind of harsh on them? I mean, you hear all these proceedings sometimes where people just don't show up because they just are witnesses, or someone just won't pursue something because they say, I don't want to subject my child to it or myself to it. I mean, even here in Missouri, I mean, is the system set up to really, not to say help, but in a fair and balanced way? And I know that is such a big question, but I mean, what is your sort of take on it?
What I'll say is I think the system is set up as well as it possibly can be for the resources it's had so far. There's always room for improvement. And every time you do something for somebody, you're going to find ways that you can improve on it and ways that you can make it better. So there's definitely ways that it can improve. But, as an agent of the justice system, I have to say, I think it's a lot better than what I anticipated it would be, even coming into the profession. I think we have a lot of really educated judges sitting on the bench. I think we have some really great advocates who work in the courtroom, and I think we have some really great resources available.
That's good to know. That's really good to know. Let's move on to an area that people don't talk about, which is men who are victims of sexual violence. And we have a slide for that, and it's 1 in 6 men will experience sexual assault in their lifetime, and another one, which is nearly 10% of these men, 1 in 71, will be raped. I think for the first time that this really got in mainstream media some steam, besides, of course, there's a lot over the years that's been happening when people point to the broader Catholic Church, but even with the military more recently. There's first the focus on violence, sexual violence towards women, and now it's kind of the light's been, shined on this one area of sexual violence against men within the military. How underreported this? I mean, with your clients, people coming to you, I would guess that the majority are women, or are you getting men who openly can say, hey, this happened to me, and they feel confident to talk about it?
We do have male clients at Jane Doe, and we're very open and very accepting of male clients as well as members of the LGBT community who don't identify with either a male or female gender. But I will say that most of our clients are female. And one of the things that I've really noticed is that when females call in, a lot of them are, they're ready and they're willing to accept the fact that sexual abuse has occurred and that they need help dealing with it. With men, the question is usually, well, do you even help men? And that's usually the first barrier that they have to cross, is well, first they have to find a resource that's willing to talk to them before they can even cross those other hurdles into asking for help. So I do feel like men have a separate hurdle to cross. That being said, again, I think we're getting better. I think that area is moving. It's moving slowly, but it is moving in the right direction, and that more services are becoming available for men and more people are talking about it. And that number, 1 in 6, is I think it's incredible.
Oh.
It is so much. It's so much higher. When I first learned it was much higher than even I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And you look at it, well, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men. It's really not that far apart. You know, you imagine a room that you might be in at a social gathering at a business meeting, and just look around at the number of people in that room, and that really helps it hit home in terms of how often this strikes.
Yeah, no, it's really, I mean, pretty horrific when you look at these numbers and thinking about what what people have been through. I want to go to the next one because this hits on something we talked about, and it's as many. The next slide is as many as 90% of rapes go unreported to the police or other sources, and this kind of touches on what we talked about in the first half. So a lot of times when people are calling you, they've not reached out to the police. And again, do you encourage people, you mentioned in the first half, you said you have to kind of assess the situation and know what you want to do, but a lot of times people don't know what to do. They know something bad has happened and happened to them and they've been violated, but they don't know what's going to happen when they report it. I mean, what do you say to someone like that where they need to go to the authorities to do it, they need to talk to Jane Doe, but they just don't know what's going to come? Is this going to be a year? Is this going to be a couple months? How much do I have to divulge? How do you sort of package it for them?
And well, I'll tell you this, we've worked with over 350 clients at Jane Doe in the last 3 years. And of those, I would say there's been less than 10 that had direct police involvement. Okay. So very few of the clients really want to go that route. And the reason is largely because it takes a while. And because it is very in-depth. It is, they have to go in, they have to speak with a police officer about what's going on. And a lot of them feel like a police officer is just intimidating because of the uniform they wear or whatever it is. They feel like that's a very intimidating process. And then after that, they have to sit and wait. And what they're waiting for, from a legal perspective, I say what they're waiting for is they're waiting to see if the police can collect enough evidence to really press charges and to really have a legal claim. But for a lot of survivors, the way they look at it as they're waiting for the police to decide whether or not the rape actually happened. And that is a real divide between the systems. That keeps people from wanting to report.
We're actually, we had a couple slides, but we're out of time, so I'm not going to be able to get to them. But before we wrap things up, just a quick sort of who can contact you, and they can contact you this number at all hours. We've got the information on the screen. Who would you like to call you, and under what circumstances?
Honestly, anybody who wants to speak with a lawyer about anything related to sexual abuse is welcome to call Jane Doe. We do no-cost phone consultations, so anybody can call in. We're happy to answer questions. We're happy to field them in the right direction. And if we can't help them, we're happy to give them referrals to other community organizations that can.
All right, well, that's fantastic, and the information is there for you on the screen. There's the website, the email, the phone number, the address. Please reach out, whether this is something that speaks to you if you're watching this or someone that you know. Again, Jane Doe Advocacy Center. The address is there, and again, 314-329-5339 or janedoeadvocacy.org. And Rachna, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having
so much
me,
more
Sarah.
to cover, but we just don't have the time. But thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you at home for watching City Corner and for watching STL TV Experience St. Louis.